Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Len Kinney. I'm with Spatial. Thanks. Welcome to the University of Minnesota Spatial Forum. It's great to have you all. We've got a great Borchert speaker with Maggie Cawley. Before we do that, I'd like to get a couple opening remarks from our Vice President of Research and Innovation, Dr. Shashank Priya. Shashank.
All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I will keep this very short because you want to hear from Maggie, not from us, and so I want to welcome you and thank you for coming here. This is a great and important event for us. We are Spatial University. Actually, when I came here 2 years ago and was given this whole background on what a spatial university means, and was passed upon this book that actually Bob and other co-authors wrote about how to build a spatial university. I learned a lot about the whole geospatial mapping and the whole history of how this university has contributed to go all the way from these paper-based maps into the digital world and digitized architectures. And you remember all your days and you collect the AAA maps and you go from place A to B. And now your cell phones are able to pull together all the information for you. And they not only pull together information on 2D surface, things are so advanced, you can put layers of information on top of them, like your restaurants and gas stations and demographic information and so on. And I'm being told that in future, we can run the AI on our cell phones to actually can correlate these variables with each other. So you could ask questions like, what type of income people have in this geographic area, or what are the common foods people eat in this type of area, and so on. And it just shows you. And this is amazing, that how technology has rapidly evolved to not only build these curated data sets of all kinds. I was at NRI, which is another of our institute in Duluth. And it was for my first time to realize the power of GIS, that they were mapping the height of the trees. And they were calculating the total biomass present inside a given forest area. And using that in order to determine what type of biofuel we can generate from this amount of biomass. So the sustainable aviation fuel. This is unbelievable, that you could have satellite mapping with that kind of precision, that you could accurately, with few percent here and there, determine the total biomass of a given tree. And this is used on a daily basis commonly. And so not only we have this unbelievable amount of data, but now we can actually start to run some really good queries on this data to determine how we can plan certain things. Because of Len, thanks very much, Len, for pulling together this amazing lecture and the whole team here. But because of Len, I had the chance to visit a couple of times Esri User Conference in California. And one of my favorite stories from this conference is, and I'll share with you because I was just so impressed. There was a town in California where they were trying to get equity in that town. So basically, let's say the richer part of the population was buying housing in certain area, and then there were low economic folks who were almost buying in other areas because the land prices were cheap. And then you ask the question, why is it cheap in this area? Why the land is expensive on the other side? And you find that all the restaurants and good schools with ratings and hospitals and the highways and roadways, they are on this other part of the town where where basically the higher economic income folks are living. And that's the reason that the development in the other side was being depressed. Because when you don't have a good quality education for your kids, when you don't have a good health for them, when you don't have resources, for example, mobility, and you don't have public transportation available, then you can't go to work so easily, then there's a very little opportunity for you to develop. And so the area gets more depressed as a function of time. And so this town intentionally started to build highways and roadways, locating the schools and hospitals such that it's in closer vicinity and it's available and accessible by public transportation for the folks in the other part of the town. And they showed it by color coding maps. And they show the maps over the area of 10 years, how all the way from red and green, everything almost become a uniform color over the whole town. And I was like, this is unbelievable, that you can plan tens of years and actually just by infrastructure co-location and allowing people to access these utilities, you could actually change the living and livelihood of people and bring them to have a good quality of life. And that's GIS. So I feel our university is very well positioned where we are with respect to contributing both technically and also the utility of this tool for various kinds of application. And I thank our supercomputing team for continuously advancing it. They are all the time trying to identify how to assist the users. I'm told we have over 38,000 accounts or so, the students, faculty, and so on. So they're all the time trying to find ways in order to provide easy access so that people can incorporate geographical thinking in their daily processes. I'll stop here, and I'll invite my colleague, Bob, to come up here. He was actually, I had a very, very close partnership with Bob because he was vice provost and dean for undergraduate affairs. And I was so impressed with him. I'm saying it in front of you, not because to embarrass you, but somebody who really deeply thinks about success of undergraduate students. And when we sat together and ate lunch and talk about it, it was all about how we can design the curricula and how we can provide them different kinds of tools and so on, such that they are so much positioned for achieving success in today's rapidly evolving world. So I've learned a lot from you, Bob, and thank you so much for this. Yeah, thanks.
Great. Well, thank you, Shashank. I'm sensing you're a closet geographer. You're welcome to come do some teaching in our department now if you. Yeah. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Bob McMaster. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Geography these days, and I'm really pleased, as always, to be able to welcome you to this year's John Borchert Lecture and to introduce this year's speaker, Maggie Cawley, who's the OpenStreet US Executive Director, and we'll learn a lot more about that. Each year, we're fortunate to have members of the Borchert family who are able to join us for this lecture. That really makes it very special, and I think I have it right. I had to make some modifications, so we'll see. I'm pleased to acknowledge Bob and Barb Borchert, Dave and Pat Borchert, and Laura and Charlie, who are Bob and Barb's children, are here also. So welcome. Bill couldn't make it, unfortunately. He apparently wasn't feeling well, and I'm sorry about that because Bill asks terrific questions when he comes to these, so we're going to miss Bill doing that. We greatly appreciate your taking the time to join us for the lecture and celebrate the memory of John Borchert. We were also always delighted when Jane Borchert, John's wife and close partner in his career, could attend these lectures before she passed away. Believe it or not, this is now the 18th John Borchert Lecture in Geographic Information Science. Our first was in the spring of 2008, and some of our previous speakers have included Jack Dangermont. He was the inaugural John Borchert lecturer. Michael Goodchild, Mark Mominier, Tim Nyergis, Nina Lamb, Tom Fisher. Tom's here.
I'm here.
Vipin Kumar, Don Wright, Sean Wang, and many others who have joined us. I was lucky enough to get to know John Borchert when I arrived at the University of Minnesota in 1989. John had just recently retired, but he was still very active in the department and in the field of geography. John Borchert, one of the intellectual fathers of our geography department, had a great love of maps and spatial information. In fact, because of his great interest in cartography, our internationally recognized map library was named the Borchert Map Library in May of 1989. John Borchert was one of the most influential geographers of the 20th century. Educated in geology at DePauw University and having completed a PhD with a focus in climatology from, I'm sorry to say, the University of Wisconsin, he turned his keen mind to human settlement patterns and urban geography in his later years. A Regents professor and a member of the National Academy of Sciences, one of the very first geographers so named, John was a member of the geography faculty for 40 years, from 1949 to 1989, with a career that intellectually spanned the discipline from biophysical geography to urban geography, but his work always maintained a constant focus on the map as the obligatory tool of our profession. His doctoral dissertation, in fact, which I've looked at pretty carefully, was filled with maps. It was another influential Minnesota geographer, Yi-Fu Tuan, who wrote, "In a period of intellectual flux, when geography seems tempted to follow non-geographical sirens of transient glamour," that's classic Yi-Fu Tuan, John Borchert always manages to anchor the discipline's sense of identity on the rock of cartographic information. Several of John's last projects focused on the upper Middle West and Minnesota. His seminal book, America's Northern Heartland, An Economic and Historical Geography of the Upper Middle West, was published in 1987. And his video series for public TV, The Geography of Minnesota, appeared in the early 1990s. And in fact, I remember well sitting in on John's Geography of Minnesota class during the 1990-91 academic year and learning a great deal about my new home state. Thus, John remained very active in his research after his retirement and passed away in the spring of 2001. In 2008, given his signature contributions to our department in the field of geography and his great love of geography and maps and spatial information, the University of Minnesota named this GIS lecture series after him. Now, this year's distinguished Borchert speaker is Maggie Cawley, OpenStreetMap US Executive Director. OpenStreetMap US is a nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing the democratization of geospatial data by catalyzing collaborative action around OpenStreetMap among individuals, government agencies, nonprofits, corporations, and academia. With a background in urban planning, GIS, and community engagement, Maggie is passionate about leveraging the power of open data and open source technology to create more inclusive and innovative solutions for various industries. Maggie also serves as chair of the National Geospatial Advisory Committee, a very prestigious position in our discipline. In 2013, Maggie started her own company, Boomerang Geospatial, which focused on open mapping education programs. And some of the really interesting projects included Save Sibanya, a wildlife census and mapping education profit in South Africa, developing conservation programs in Botswana with the Narosan, and teaching short courses in open source GIS. Maggie holds an MA in Urban and Regional Planning from Virginia Commonwealth University, a BA in International Studies from the University of Richmond. Additionally, she received a Geographic Information Systems Graduate Certificate from the Johns Hopkins University. On a personal note, we're now working on the 5th edition of our thematic cartography book and adding a chapter on maps and society. And one of the sections in that chapter is on OpenStreetMaps. So I'm very anxious to hear this, and you may hear from me. Please help me welcome Maggie Cawley, who will speak on, not surprisingly, OpenStreetMap, the community behind your open map data. Maggie, welcome.
Put that down there. Thank you so much. What an honor and a privilege to be here with all of you. And And thanks, Bob. You did some homework. Take away the first 2 slides, catch us back up on some time, I guess. I have to say, I had the honor to be here all day, and I met so many wonderful folks in this community and really have a special thing going here, University of Minnesota. So I'm thrilled to be a part of it, at least for a day, and I hope that the collaboration continues beyond today. So I will kind of give a little more nuance. I've been asked, how does one become the executive director of OpenStreetMap US? And it's not always, as you know, the path to geo is definitely not always a direct route. We tend to take meandering streams sometimes, and that's certainly my geo journey was not a direct path. But my love of maps was born early on in rural Pennsylvania, the metropolis of Coatesville, cornfields and trees on the edge of Lancaster County. And my window to the world in the 80s became the National Geographic magazine. So I eagerly would await that issue and pull out the maps and plaster them on our powder room wall. No one could fight me to take them down. So the love of maps was born early, but the drive to become a mapper was not yet there. I went to University of Richmond for undergrad, and I studied international studies. They did not have a geography department at the time, nor did they teach GIS, sadly. So I studied international studies, which included taking Russian art and filling in things for multidisciplinary classes, which was fun, but it did not exactly set me on the way to being the ambassador of a Caribbean nation as I had envisioned. I needed a job out of college, so I ended up working with a redevelopment firm and doing adaptive reuse of buildings, something that I had known nothing about in my undergrad. So I went back to school at VCU part-time and studied urban planning and historic reuse. And that's where I made my first map, and that was using SPSS. Does anybody use that anymore? I don't think so. Does that date me? So that kind of created this love of map. And along the way, my studies, I thought this was interesting, have something in common with John Borchert in the fact that we both were interested in water resources. So in undergrad, I looked at the population growth and world water supply, and wasn't uplifted by the research, but was motivated. And then when I did my master's thesis, I was doing water resource elements for counties in Maryland and predicting, kind of modeling the future decline in a lot of our drinking water. I was further inspired to continue looking at that, and I started working for a consulting company called Environmental Resources Management. And that's where I really dove in and realized the power of GIS and went back for yet. I realized at this time I could have gotten a PhD with the many years that I had spent in school, but I went back to school part-time again and got that degree in GIS so I could better utilize the tool to do impact assessments and plans and really started to learn the impact of a map. The other thing that came to my mind, though, while I was working there, and I do have 2 different kind of, sorry about that article language, but I started doing impact assessments for natural resource degradation and extractive industries, and it was kind of stealing my soul. So I was inspired to take GIS and try to get it out of the office, take it outside of the back offices of a GIS analyst and see if I could bring it to the world to help to solve these problems. So as Bob mentioned, spoiler alert, I started my own nonprofit, LLC, Boomerang Geospatial, to try to bring, at the time I was using ArcGIS, into nonprofits' hands to visualize their data and support their missions. What I didn't know is at the time I couldn't afford the license that I needed to support my business. So Detour, I got a bartending job to support myself and learned about the OSGeo and OpenStreetMap communities, where I learned QGIS and had really great support from the folks in the Phosphor-G community to get back on my feet and continue Boom Geo. Some of my first roles were in I was living in Baltimore at the time, and I got a summer gig with Parks and People Foundation, teaching their students who were there to work in parks how to map. And it was really amazing to see students go out with GPS units, collect data, and be like, whoa, that just showed up on a map. So that inspired me further, and started a little program called Map Girls. They went to Mauritius and taught some students there. That's a whole nother story. But it got me into a lot of different things. For about 7 years, I lived out of a backpack and said yes to every opportunity that I could take on. I taught some courses in the Caribbean and open source and open mapping and did some drone teaching. And then I found my way into South Africa, where Lake Sabaya was starting to dry up, and a friend of mine had a piece of land right next to it, so we started bringing students there to map hippos and measure the lake and do some studies on, once again, water. It finds its way in there. So that was a number of years. I found my way to Botswana. I would have missed that place, but the Narrowsand didn't have a map of their reserve, so they didn't know where their hides were. And they knew where they were, but it was really hard to bring people in and make money off of tourism. So they asked what we wanted, and I said, a couple of cold beers and a couple nights in a real bed after 3 months of being out on the road. That was pretty nice. And then they welcomed me back. I brought a group of students from George Washington University Geography back to Botswana in late 2017. I had hoped that would be the start of another career doing this, but things didn't work out that way. Along the way, I became a board member for OpenStreetMap US. So we were all board run for 9 years. I helped hire the first executive director in 2018 as a board member. And then it was, I don't know if anybody recognizes that room. She didn't quite work out, so after 3 months, we found ourselves without a director, and I said, I'll just step in as interim. Careful with that. And 5 years ago, I'm 5 years fast forward, I'm still there. So like I said, it's a roundabout route, kind of that reluctant leader role, but it's been a really amazing 5 years. So what is this organization? Again, Bob kind of told you a little bit about it, but it was started in 2010 by 5 passionate volunteers. I was hoping I would see one of them today, but I don't think he's here. And really started to convening all the stakeholders. I mean, the amazing thing about OpenStreetMap is it really does bring a lot of people together, and has grown over the last 15 years, and now have transitioned to a staff-run organization. But to get to what OpenStreetMap US does, we first have to talk about OpenStreetMap. So this is where I get you involved. How many people know what it is? How many people have used OpenStreetMap data? Oh, cool. This is the one I like to ask, though. How many people have contributed to the map? Fewer hands. Okay. Well, hopefully I share something with you today for those of you who are very familiar with the data, a few things you didn't know. So back in time, OpenStreetMap celebrated our 20th anniversary this year. It was formed in 2004. And a lot of people have the thought that it was really altruistic from the beginning. But honestly, Steve Coast was starting a business, CloudMade, needed data, didn't want to pay UK for the data because it wasn't open data at the time in the United Kingdom. So he hired folks to drive around with GPS or sensors on their bikes and couriers and upload that data to the internet. Well, that caught on like hotcakes. So, I mean, we've now scaled beyond Steve's wildest dreams. There's more than almost 10 million contributors. And the statistics folks out there, don't check me on this. I had to check it earlier. So in just 1 hour, you can see edits, more than 100,000 edits made in over 100 countries. So I like this visualization. It shows pretty much the first 11 years of growth, and every light that's blinking is an edit that's being made. I would like to find that company, ask them to do another one of those. So people utilize it all over the globe. It really is a global community. Disaster response is a big one. Hopefully we start doing a little more resilience in that area. Really localizing data collection, bringing into the hands of folks around the world. And many governments leverage OpenStreetMap as their government database. Uganda is an example of that. Here's some pictures from the global community get-togethers. We do like to get out from behind our desktops and get together. So there's usually at least one international convening a year, and there's a lot of State of the Map's happening all over the globe. Next year's global State of the Map is going to be in the Philippines, and they have a very strong community there. The U.S. community has been pretty strong over the years. There's a lot of small groups. I used to be part of one in Baltimore, Map Time Be More. And see the New York community, they were doing a bike map-a-thon during COVID. You can see the masks. Seattle, Salt Lake City is another big one. And hopefully soon the University of Minnesota could be a hub for Map Minnesota. Here's some pictures from our last conference. And actually this is last year's in Richmond. We get a really big diversity of attendees from government to academia. Lots of mappers join us and finally get to meet in person. 5 years ago, we were here. Was anybody at that conference? Excellent. It feels like a lifetime ago, honestly, but a lot has happened between now and then. But we had a really great time here in 2019 and got to really engage with the University of Minnesota community. And there's the group. I forget what our final numbers were on that. I think it was around 350. So as you're seeing, I like to say OpenStreetMap's more than just a base map. I know many people use it that way, but it really is a thriving community of contributors. It's a global technical ecosystem. I mean, you have the same schema from Tahiti to Tallahassee, and that's really helpful for a lot of reasons. We have difficulty doing that across states sometimes. So it's an avenue for citizen engagement and really becoming a way towards data democracy and bridging some of those divides. You can collect whatever you want, no matter who you are. It drives public participation in decision making. You can prove a point. You want to map all the parks and your green spaces and then say we need more. You can. It's really efficient. Leveraging the power of the crowd, it does reduce costs and reduces the redundancy. There's a lot of redundancy in data collection, as many of you may know. Redundancy does make money, but it also costs money. So reducing that redundancy and reducing the silos really also starts to build community. Probably know how it works, but I'll just do a 101 for those of you who may not. So it's more than just streets. Don't let the name fool you. And really, the data model represents anything in the physical world. So that tree out there, a bench, a sidewalk, I-95. Well, I'm on the East Coast, sorry, bias. What's the major highway here? All of the lakes. If you see it, you can map it if it's going to stay there. It's a key value pair, so think unlimited attributes and metadata, as creative as you can become. You can probably propose it as a tag. And you can put in, all kinds of things. I have a trail example here. Here's an example. If you really like research and haven't been to our wiki, you can fall into a giant rabbit hole there. And if you like to edit wikis, go right ahead. But it really teaches you how to map anything in the world. We have a community member who really likes to map flagpoles, so if I ever want to map a flagpole, I know who to ask. So the data is added by volunteers. I said there's almost 10 million contributors, but those contributors are coming from not only the volunteer community, but also governments and other entities add data, GPS tracks, there's imports. Corporations also add their own data. Many of the large tech companies have their own mapping teams, adding data to OpenStreetMap to drive some of their tools, Microsoft, Meta, Apple, to name a few. And then it's used by humanitarian organizations, corporations, media and academia. If you ever see the word Mapbox in the corner, it's very likely OpenStreetMap data. They're just the company that gets to have their name on it. Here's some of the other names that you might recognize. Anybody ever receive a package from Amazon? They actually, many of the logistics drivers add driveways and addresses to OpenStreetMap, which helps everybody, right? Pokemon Go is a fun one that people don't realize, though. I could tell some stories about that, but I'll skip it. It also finds its way into some of the desktop applications that there's a quick OSM application in QGIS that's just really helpful, which I've used in the past to extract some data. And I know this is just improving as time goes on. I mean, Esri has their feature layers that pretty much highlight a lot of OpenStreetMap data. And then if you're navigating with AllTrails or Strava, it's very likely that data. So you get it, it's everywhere. There are ways for us to query and QA, QC data. OSM CHA recently became a project under our charter program, as did Map Roulette. And then you can query, extract, you can do all kinds of things with the data. So we're working on improving that tooling to make it more accessible to folks so you don't need a data science degree to get to the data, even though it's good to have. Like I said, there's plugins for ARC and for Q. There's also an editor within ArcGIS. Having never used it, I don't know how it is. Sorry. One of my favorite tools is the tasking manager. So how it's organized, right? It's loosely, but you can start to task out areas and engage the crowd to finish certain tasks. There's mobile and field applications. If you haven't heard of EveryDoor and you're interested in mapping POIs, it's very fun. I suggest you check it out. And you can work offline and upload it later. And we'll go through all of them because I don't have that much time. There's a lot of ways to communicate as well. So if you want to write to me based on an edit that I did, you could click on my username and send me a message to say, Maggie, that's not the Wilson Library. Come on, fix it. Or so we can communicate as a community. Even though there's almost 10 million of us, we can reach each other. The OSM US community has a Slack. It has almost 8,000 people in it at this point. And there's topics, you name it, it's probably in there. This is a project that was Vermont Emergency Management reached out, and the community created a task to support the flooding up there. 132 volunteers mapped 24,000 buildings pretty quickly for this. This is one I didn't even know about. Somebody created this for the Mendon Halley, the Glacial Lake outburst. A community member went in, engaged the community, set up the task, and got this mapped within 4 weeks for the Alaska community. We have a partnership with Kaboom, and this is our Philadelphia example, but we also mapped all the playgrounds, the community mapped all the playgrounds in Colorado in just a couple months for Kaboom. They're a play equity nonprofit that works to find play deserts and fill them with playgrounds. This is what it kind of looks like and how detailed you can be. I added, that little picture's not supposed to be there, but that's an example. If you were to click on my name as a user, that's what would pop out. You could see my edits and my notes. Mapper since March 1st, 2013. And then you can see comments. So 4 bars, updated the hotel 3 months ago. I'm not sure what data they added because I didn't spend that much time on it, but that's one example of buildings and services. Here's the I thought I put in this library. But you can add all kinds of data, whatever you know that's real. I really loved the name of this place, Dinkytown Greenway. You can map greenways. Surface type is really helpful to know accessibility. One way, you want to know that. So yeah, for those of you who are new to OpenStreetMap, this is kind of data that you can collect. Here's some things happening in Minnesota. Is anyone working on these projects here? Yes. I'm going to invite you up to talk about it, but afterwards. Some projects to add services to rural roads, which is amazing, and some highway classification. So you can find these projects if you join the OSM US Slack. There's discussion there, and you can help contribute to these if you're interested. Amazing stuff. How is this organized? I get that question a lot. And actually, really, it's a distributed ecosystem. It's very loosely organized, but there are some organizations involved in organizing the distribution of non-organization. So OpenStreetMap itself is a data set. It is not a map. People always go, well, how do I make the map? I'm like, well, you take it out. So it's a data commons. It belongs to everyone. It's open data. If I make an edit, it technically belongs to me. So that makes the ODBL licenses an interesting one. But the goal isn't to make a map like Google Maps. It's goal to make the data that anybody can use. So the OpenStreetMap Foundation, however, is the custodian of the servers. So they were founded in 2004 to be the global entity and legal entity for the project. This didn't get updated. I added some bullets. They have 1 systems administrator and 7 board members and a budget of about $600,000 a year to run that server, which is not very much. And then OpenStreetMap US. We don't control OpenStreetMap data. We really are here to convene and support US stakeholders. And here we are. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the work we've been doing since 2019, and then I think that's going to be our time. So Bob gave a great overview, so I won't dive into saying that because it's right there. We have programs now. We're supporting technology and tools. We're now up to a team of 5. In addition to 5 board members, we still have member-elected board members who change every 2 years. There is an election coming up in February. If you've always wanted to be a board member, this is your chance. And most recently, we brought on 2 staff in August, almost doubling our team, which is really exciting. We sit at the middle of the map, pretty much. So all of those stakeholders, citizen volunteers, the private sector, nonprofits, academia, government, who wouldn't necessarily normally come together for other reasons, have been convening around OpenStreetMap for years. So OpenStreetMap US is that nonprofit that can support that. We have tools and tech that we're bringing under our umbrella and creating to support mappers and different forms of data like public domain map, which I can go into. Field Papers is an offline editor. You can print out a paper map with a grid on it, go out and do some field surveying, bring it back in. There's a QR code in the corner, scan it in. It's really great for getting community engaged in mapping and teaching kind of those basic geospatial skills. And then I showed the tasking manager, and we're just about to launch the sandbox. So there'll be an offline, off-main server learning environment where if you're a new mapper, you can go in there without the fear of breaking something and be able to learn how to map before you jump into the main database. A couple programs we support. TeachOSM supports education. Would get that away. It started off as an education program to bring high school teachers into OpenStreetMap and start using OSM as a way to introduce geospatial thinking in high school at an early age. So leveraging, in history class, or what are we mapping, different things that a tool not as maybe as scary as a GIS. We now have an education working group that works along with TeachOSM, and that's going to be the kind of flagship for the sandbox, and hopefully a full OpenStreetMap classroom. Mapping for Impact, we partner with civic organizations, nonprofits to figure out their data needs and fill the gaps, like Kaboom. They needed playground data to prove their point, and we helped them collect it. So we're always looking for nonprofits to support and then get the tasks out to the community. And then we support a lot of technology projects. I don't know if anybody's into open source software. As you know, many go supported by one maintainer and don't have a lot of support. So we have 2 tiers of projects, programs now to support those projects. In some cases we are fiscal sponsor. In other cases we're providing a monthly stipend, but to hopefully, spur innovation and bring on more tools and tech. Our first one of our community projects we just welcomed a couple weeks ago. We just launched the program like a month ago. This is a cartography project for those of you into cartography, OSM Americana. It's a goal to make OSM data look like old US maps. It's really cool. And then we have charter projects. Open Historical Map, I've met a lot of folks interested in history, but Open Historical Map is our crowdsourced project to make the oldest map of the world. So, if you can map Minneapolis in the 1920s and then in 1930s, and you can do a time slider along that. So it's a really cool project, and they're always looking for people. We hold events, like you saw in the pictures. Here are some of the upcoming events. We do Mappy Hours. We did a lot of Mappy Hours over the pandemic. We do fewer now because we are able to meet more in person, but they're fun. They're an hour once a month on a Wednesday night or something, and people come in and talk about their projects and really just get to know who's Maggie Maps, right? Who's the person behind the username. We have a virtual conference, Mapping USA. It's going to be in January. We're looking for proposals for speakers. So if you're working on something, definitely share that. OSM Geo Week, is this week. So we have a map of events across the world on our site, promoting OSM and supporting those communities. Fed Geo Day is going to be in April. That's focusing on open source for our federal government, so that might be of interest. That's in Washington, D.C. And then, who doesn't love the Kraken? We just announced our State of the Map US is going to be in Boston in June. Our call for proposals is open, and we also have scholarships available. So if you want to go and you need a scholarship, please apply by the end of the year. And yeah, hope to see you there. And yeah, if you want to submit a talk also. Who was I talking to about the working groups? We just keep growing. They're like multiplying. It's like Gizmo, 8 after midnight. So we have many different ways to get involved. There's a government working group. There's Collaborator Sync. I know there's a lot of folks interested in transportation here. Our pedestrian working group has been really interesting. PDMap, trails, the trails I'll talk about. Our government working group runs the gamut from county GIS offices to federal DOT. So we're bringing these folks together monthly to talk about innovations and ideas for furthering collaboration around open data and open source, and some really amazing things have come out of it. I learned last week from Kendall County, Illinois. They just started maintaining their addresses in OpenStreetMap. So that's awesome. I'll quickly go through the Trail Stewardship Initiative. I think I'm doing okay on time? Okay. So this is something that I've been really excited about. It's because it's the first of its kind in the OpenStreetMap ecosystem. Dun, dun, dun. A couple years ago, I got a note, and anytime it says "Dear OpenStreetMap," I'm like, "Do I open this?" Because this used to have the phone number would be out on the internet, and I would get phone calls, "Ma'am, I'm on a bike lane, and it just ends here, but it's really here, and it's not mapped correctly." Yeah. It's funny now. So I get this email, and it's 2021. We're all still trying to figure out what the world looks like. And it's this backcountry coordinator in Utah, in Canyonlands National Park, saying like, "Hey, we were seeing this uptick in visitation of our national parks. People have stopped using our paper maps, and they're relying on their blue dot." And I call the app companies, and they say, "Well, it's OpenStreetMap. Call them." So, like, okay, well, what are we going to do? At the time, I think there were two of us. One of us. So I invited this person to come to one of our Mappy hours and just say, "Why don't you present to the community?" Which she said yes, and I thought it was so brave. So I did my best to reach out to anyone who might be interested in the issue. We had this Mappy hour, and Carrie kind of just pointed out the issues and kind of that trail rendering. So as many of you know, OpenStreetMap is used in all of these apps, and they pull data from our database, and we don't have any control after that what's done with it. Well, a lot of what was happening is this data was ending up, as you can see on the right side, that was an unofficial trail, and it looks exactly like the one on the left. So if you're a hiker, you don't know. Again, here's a National Park Service. This is what you would get at the gate. And then this is how it was rendered in. The top one's Gaia GPS, the middle one's All Trails, and the bottom one is CalTopo. You can see in the bottom example, that unofficial trail is even bolder than the official trail. So by the end of her presentation, it was very clear that there was an issue here. So I said, who would be interested in joining a working group? Let's create another one. And figuring out how we can address this problem. There's many legs to this stool. So, you could see this data is getting out to a couple 100 million people every year, and especially with the bigger apps, and there's something we need to do. So we've been in at it the first year was talking about schema. But we've convened a working group, and there's been almost 120 folks are on the email list now. But we've started creating best practices for tagging trails alongside federal land managers, state land managers. All Trails and Gaia are part of the working group. Because the big question was, even if we map it perfectly, will it get rendered quick, like the same way? So we had to create not only mapping guidelines for the mappers, but rendering guidelines for the app companies. So if this data doesn't say it's official, please don't show it as a big red line. So over the couple years, we've been working on things like this, and then getting feedback from those local land managers on if we've done okay. The culmination of this for me was this past June. We themed our State of the Map US conference in Salt Lake City. It was the great outdoors, and we were able to bring together many of the folks who are working online together over the last couple years together in person. We had representation from the Forest Service. We had park rangers all coming together to even further figure out how we might solve some of these problems. So all of you know that the absence of data can sometimes cause more problems. And if something just says highway equals path, it can mean a lot of things. It doesn't tell me anything. So as part of that, we looked at a complex situation in Washington parks. I'll buzz through this, but you can learn more. And we identified those high priority tags, like what's going to give us the most amount of information in the shortest amount of time and start saving lives as quickly as possible. No pressure. So we settled upon the name, the operator, the informal, and this is where it's either dark red or it's very, very faint. And then, can you bring your dog? Can I ride my horse there? And then there was a detailed tagging schema. So, some of the slides I showed earlier had the breadth of tags. And you can imagine Forest Service and Park Service and BLM all have different schemas, which made it so easy to come up with these. But you can see, so we identified these things. This was the rendering we gave to, at this time it was all trails, and said, can you change the way that you show our data on your map? And this is what it looked like after that first pilot. So you can see that is a little bit of a mess, and that's what it looks like after it's tagged correctly. So by identifying those gaps and filling them with actual data and not just having it say highway equals path, we really were able to start working together. And by having them render based on the tagging of OSM community guidelines, then worked out. So we're pretty excited about this, so we're still going. The biggest thing I do is stakeholder engagement on this. I've done feels like 20 presentations to the U.S. Forest Service, but it's a really important part of getting people engaged in this and seeing the importance of updating the data in OSM. Workflow improvement right now, it's pretty hard to map trails because you're referencing like a national park website, you have it open another, you're trying to find the same trail, you don't know exactly what's going on. So we're working on improving the tooling so that we can get more folks involved in improving these maps. We want to create an ambassador program to support this, and really been targeting those really high use areas across the country where people are getting hurt more and trying to hone in our volunteer time. I won't go on this. This is kind of an example of how data is added in our tasking manager. You can add the surface type, you can add the width. There's different ways to. So this is Bryce County. We worked with them to update the data in Bryce County National Park. And if you need to add a field, there's the dogs are not allowed. And this is the big one. But if you only had 5 minutes, you add those 4 tags. If you know more about it, you can add even more than that. And then the other window is using that reference data. So there's a lot of really great data on trails, but it's often not spatial. It's just a list on a site, which is great if you can find it. So what's happened, the trail network has grown. I mean, not only are we updating trails that are there, people are mapping more trails. So that's been really helpful. 13% of trails now have an operator tag compared to 9.9%. We haven't really even expanded the project yet. I've been kind of holding back the crowd because we want to make sure that the tools are there and that we have the time for engagement before we really open the gates on this. And we started in Utah, but now we're going to start expanding to other places to pilot things. This is one of the tools we're looking at to identify those metadata gaps. So does it have the operator tag? Does it have the informal tag, and then being able to highlight those on a map and edit them pretty quickly. OpenTrailMap. We're still working on that. We're trying to resource the development of that. Always the challenge of a small nonprofit. So once this is up, hopefully even land manager will be able to leave a note and say this trail is not open. And even the hikers, we've been talking with All Trails, hey guys, about creating a feedback loop between hikers and their apps, especially for like unsafe situations. So prioritizing that safety information so we can get it in OpenStreetMap and other apps can benefit it as well, and hopefully not devalue them as a proprietary tool. And then we're going to launch a trail ambassador program. So I can't talk to every land manager in the country. So finding folks who are knowledgeable about OpenStreetMap, but also willing to act as ambassadors in their regions to help, bridge the gap between, mapping and natural resource management. So this is something we're building now. If you're interested in participating in that conversation, we're always welcoming new ideas on how to make this scale to a national level and potentially repeatable in other countries. We're going to do a presentation on this in December with American Trails. We started partnering with some nonprofits around trails and recreation, which has been really interesting, and accessing that trail community, which is a deep dive that I never expected in this role. These are the initiative goals, improving equity and access to our national trails, improving safety, and really promoting responsible recreation, not only for a hiker, but for folks bringing people to our public lands through their applications. So kind of circle back, I'll hammer home, it's more than just a base map. Where goals are preserving and centering local knowledge and potentially archiving it. Improving humanitarian efforts, providing truly free data, trying to foster engaged citizenship no matter what folks are interested in, and bringing that power of open data to people worldwide. The last question I get a lot is like, why do people do this? There's a lot of different reasons, right? I mean, sometimes you need data and you're going to map it yourself because it's not there. Other folks, the community is really amazing. So that sense of community, you go out with your community and map sidewalks or, points of interest. People do want to make a difference. People have more of a goal, I believe, especially geo folks, in building something rather than tearing it down. Yes, every barrel of apples has maybe one or two bad ones. But for the most part, this project has lasted 20 years because of people's desire to build something. And it's kind of fun. If you're in a really boring webinar or something and start drawing some buildings, I like to map swimming pools, but it's very satisfying. Because you know that every edit you make is supporting the community. It's not just a dot or a line on a map, but it's really someone's gonna use it. Maybe they'll put out a fire with that swimming pool that I drew. Here's some words of our community. A lot of rural areas are misrepresented or poorly mapped, and reaching out to other options, they often don't reply. So you can just go in and do it yourself. A lot of people want to support it because they see it as a major benefit. So there's a lot of mapping motivations out there, and it's actually hard to capture them. So if you have them, share them with me so I can put them on a slide. And to me, it comes down to the fact that place is personal. We all care about what happens in our backyard. And, if someone changes something, there's a really good chance that someone's watching and they're going to fix it. So if you have a question, keep that in mind. It's been a great pleasure. So I hope there's some questions. There's ways to stay connected. We have a newsletter and a Slack. And hopefully even more stuff that we'll create with all of you. So again, submit a talk for Mapping USA or State of the Map US. We'd love to see you there. We have a membership if you're interested in that, and we have all the working groups. And there's no requirements to join. Anyone is welcome. So you just have to be nice. So thank you, and I hope to take a few questions.
Questions?
Hi. Thank you very much. That was fantastic. You mentioned Pokemon Go as one of your users. Within that app, people are able to identify points of interest and identify them for their local area. Does that get communicated back to you as well, so that's usable on your end?
I wish. So one of the things that, I asked the question about has anyone contributed, and one of the things that I've found in being able to talk with companies, it is not as easy as they'd like it to be to contribute things back, especially in the Trails and other apps. If there was, people just want to hand me a box of data and say, here, this is great, can you put it in? And one of the things that we'd like to work on is some kind of improved conflation tooling to make it easier for the tens of thousands of companies that are updating and gathering data to contribute back and improve the map for everyone. We're not technically there on the OSM US and the OSM side. Some companies may already have the capability, but it's behind a door, so. Yeah.
Oh, I guess, yeah, my question was very similar. Like in the metro area, all 10 counties, every day they republish their street data set. It's rebuilt every single day with the latest updates, and it's all free and open data. And but to share that with you, we couldn't just give you the whole data set. Is that?
If I had a team of like 50 people, I would say yes.
Okay.
But at this point, I mean, there's tools that we're creating. If there's Rapid is one editor that you can bring in data sets and do some human-in-the-loop kind of checking of like comparing the data sets and bringing in a building at a time. We'd really like to improve that technology so it's a little smoother, but you still want to have a person checking things. Because like, honestly, one building might be really well drawn, say you're trying to bring in the same building, but one might have really good metadata. So it's like, okay, well, I want this geometry, but I want to know if it's residential and its height, and it's so how can we truly bring the best together to create a cool data set?
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Maggie, not only for the talk, but for having OpenStreetMap. I think all of us are using it, and it's a very valuable thing. I think people call it the Wikipedia of maps, so people contributed to the, like Wikipedia. I have two questions for you. One thing, I understand the importance of having people contributed there, and that's some cornerstone behind OpenStreetMap. When are we going to have AI contribute somehow? So I don't have, as a person, I don't have to contribute exactly what is there, but I can have data, and then you can have some modules that harvest this data and find some of the information there.
There is that. It's called Map with AI.
Map with AI.
And it's that human-in-the-loop editor, but it's built, Meta built it, and it's not used a lot by the community yet, so we're hoping to integrate AI into some of our other editors.
Yeah, I think we're missing the modules that can harvest the data and then convert it to metadata uploaded to your map. My second question, you mentioned at the beginning very briefly that the infrastructure behind this data. So you already have this data sitting on some infrastructure, and it costs you like $600K a year for server, something like this.
That's the personnel involved too.
Oh,
that's the salaries of the people and the servers and the everything.
So from the server point of view, you didn't mention much about the kind of infrastructure that hold all your data here, and whether you have a team to think about optimizing it or making it more, whatever, cheaper, more accommodating there.
So the OpenStreetMap Foundation hosts working groups. One of them is the operations working group, and there's a lot of volunteers working really hard on this. And then there's the data working group. But like I said, as far as staff, there's one systems administrator keeping OpenStreetMap running at this point. So there's not a lot of time in his day to kind of do anything else.
Thanks, Maggie. That's a great talk. I learned a lot. I have a question about how what are the ethical issues surrounding working with private companies who will use the open data and then perhaps not contribute back? And are there any of those ethical issues that you run into, or is there, just curious.
Somebody made fun of me once because they're like, she thinks they're just going to give her money because it's cool or because it's a nice thing to do. And that tends to be my weakness, right, is that I have this optimistic view of the world. But I think with the companies, I mean, you start to think about economic growth and economic development, and you want people to use the data. If it's used, it's valuable, and that's the currency it has. So with companies, you hope that there's some corporate social responsibility and some foresight to think, hey, you know what? This really brings me a lot of value. Perhaps I should invest in it. But with tens of thousands of companies using it and probably only 15 contributing, it's very unbalanced right now, and it's something I hope to see change. But there's no real mandate that you can make besides being a good human. Sorry.
Thank you.
It's late. I don't have a filter.
I've looked a little bit at the daylight tables that Meta developed based on OSM, and my understanding is that one of the reasons they did that was to clean up some of the functional class data that a park versus a natural area versus a nature reserve versus whatever made it hard to collect chunks of like data. And I wondered for a while about OpenStreetMap, if you could talk a little bit about how functional class information for streets, for parks, for buildings, how does that get developed, and how does it stay kind of sort of the same as you go around the world and definitions of functional class change?
Okay. So this is one of the trickiest things. I mean, it's also what makes it kind of amazing that a project like OpenStreetMap is still alive. I mean, because if I want to map an elevator, it's a lift. So some of the nomenclature, it started in the UK, is still there. But what we've done, and uses that wiki to communicate different things for different areas. So, and I can propose something. So there's a voting. It's very democratic. You vote on a new tag or a new attribute, and the community looks at it and says, if this is what you need to, if I wanted to do forest bathing, for example, great locations for forest bathing. I only say this because I was at a trails conference and I got asked this question. Like, well, if you could define, what the attributes would make for good forest bathing and kind of lay that out a little bit scientifically for us, we could probably create a new tag for you to say this is suitable for forest bathing. But, if you check out the wiki, I mean, it's pretty amazing. There's a lot of pictures. So if you're pictorially inclined, you can say, okay, this is a fire hydrant, and this is how you tag it so that it matches up. I think what we're starting to see more of now, especially with our Trails Working Group, is coming up with those, tagging guidelines. So if you're in the US and you're mapping a certain type of trail, these are what we suggest you do. You can't really totally dictate how people name things or tag them, but you want to provide them with some guidance. But globally, if you call something a house and it doesn't look like a house in the US, the beauty is they can do that. So yeah, I understand the usage of, the daylight, but also, I'll stop there.
Other questions? To Bob, and then I'll come back here.
Maggie, I'm afraid I'm kind of old school here. So my head goes immediately when I learn about OpenStreetMap to data quality and spatial accuracy. And with all the information flowing in, what are the mechanisms? And maybe you touched on this, but I didn't pick it up fully, to make sure you have spatial integrity and accuracy of what's being populated in your massive database.
You mean it's in the right spot?
Yep.
Okay. Well, I mean, most people are using aerial imagery to trace. So that's kind of where they're getting their information. I mean, because it's not used for land surveying or engineering or any of those really specific things, if a dot is like this much off or even a couple meters, it's not going to matter as much. So I think people are more concerned about whether it's real or not versus whether it's exactly in the right place. A lot of buildings are tagged with data too, so points of interest are part of it, but also like if this building, the metadata could be within the polygon. So that also really helps with spatial accuracy, because adding dots to a map can tend to be a little bit more wonky. But there's a quality team. I mean, there's amazing groups of volunteers doing a lot of checks on things, and all of those big companies using OpenStreetMap are also doing their own quality checks. We have a tool called OSM-CHA that does a lot of manual checks, and we're going to start teaching some of our land management partners, for example, to use this tool OSM-CHA, pull in their park boundary, and check for any updates in the last month or so. And then they can go in themselves and say, oh, is this a new trail that we built? Or, being able to connect to more people who are in their localities or, kind of stewards of that area to check things. but there's 9.5 million users, so. Yeah. Other questions?
Hi, thank you for your talk. I was wondering if OpenStreetMap has considered like data sovereignty, especially in the US. Like, is that something that you're considering as you are mapping the map?
Generally, we're not mapping private places. You know, people's houses, the data's out there, the satellite image is there for buildings and roads, but do you have something else in mind?
I guess this would be more for like reservations and stuff like that, where data is like, it's important to kind of give like different countries different like regions having to follow the rules of that like location rather than like just everyone. I'm sorry, I'm not good at explaining it.
It's definitely something that people think about. I mean, we have a channel on, with indigenous mapping, especially in this country, but in other countries, a big deal is, whose boundaries, right? There's a lot of edit wars on that, and the final answer to that was, well, why do we have to have just one? So, you can map your country the way you think it is, and you can map your country the way you think it is, and if they're different, you can see that on the map, and it's up to the user to decide which boundary they want to use. So for the most part, OSM as a global project tries to remain as neutral as possible and just give people the tools they want to use. If there are areas where there's conflict or where data can be taken down, that's the role of the data working group, and they're there to help in those. There are certain countries that don't allow their citizens to map an OpenStreetMap. I really respect that when there's edits showing up there, but they can be contributed by other people. So it is pretty complicated and nuanced, and there's no person in charge to kind of dictate how that looks.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Chloe.
Y'all are amazing. You want to get at least one question when you talk, so we can keep away.
Well, I love asking questions. I am so fascinated by just how much of this is done by volunteers. It's so amazing to see a successful organic project like this. And I'm curious about these working groups that you mentioned. It sounds like there's a lot of different types of them and levels of seriousness. Are you or your team, the staff of it, is there usually at least one of you involved with the working groups, or do some of them just sort of spontaneously create themselves and you find out about it later?
Where's that slide? I think when it hit 9, I was finally like, does anyone want to co-chair? Because I was doing a lot of facilitating early on, but now we have a couple other folks. With our education working group, we have a volunteer who facilitates that. So we're opening up that governance model and hopefully getting other people to, motivated to help lead some of these conversations. But for the most part, I was leading all of them in the beginning.
Do you sleep? Yeah, that's the question. Any left?
Oh.
Will?
So you're going to have holes in the data, places where you've got trails all around it, but nobody's bothered to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sort of interested in how you whip up enthusiasm or volunteers or whatever to get there. But another part of my question has to do, it's sort of the same kind of thing, but more complicated. That is, you're going to have different counties who call things different items. And you're not going to, or they've decided in one county it's important to get this kind of thing, in another county a different kind of thing. So standards.
Our tagging schema is very, very detailed, but I would say there's also we ran into this. Tell you a quick story. So we were working with a community in New York and this Women Remembered project, and we were finding streets that were named in recognition of famous or women in the neighborhood. And one of my teammates was helping to lead that project, and she renamed a street in the memorial name. And a mapper in New York reached out through our Slack and said, hey, why did you rename this street? It's going to mess up navigation. So they went back and forth on Slack. She's like, well, it's also the same name. It has this name too. So they devised a secondary tagging mechanism to tag the same street, 2 different names, and have it show up, but have one used for routing. So it's these kind of interesting data conflicts that have created some really cool solutions between community members. So that's kind of one part of that, is like things can coexist. It doesn't have to be one thing or the other. And depending on how you name it, if both ways of calling something is in there, you can search for it and it'll come up. The second part of your question is how to motivate people. So, people are often interested in mapping their communities, so that's helpful. Partnering with agencies and nonprofits has been helpful for motivating folks. We partnered with UVA data science students last year to kind of overlay USGS disaster risk index with undermapped areas of the U.S. and kind of tried to identify higher risk neighborhoods or communities that hadn't been updated in a while or weren't mapped. So creating those tasks and pushing them out and hopefully getting people involved in mapping for resilience. We have a lot of communications channels to reach out to folks, and sometimes we have teachers bringing it in their classroom, so students have to map for a grade. It is also just shocking to me. I mean, every year we get over 100 applications or proposals to speak at our conference, and people are doing all kinds of different things and for many different reasons. Last year we had 85 speakers. So just sitting through that and seeing the motivations, it's just kind of astounding. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
So again, there are 3,200 counties in the U.S. How do you make sure you got the same kind of information from each one?
I don't. That's everyone else's job, right? But you're the tagging
But you're
student.
mapping the data, and it's not going to be the same across those.
I'm not mapping the data.
Yeah.
But so you saw the way that our tools work. So we build a lot of that into the tooling. So if you're mapping a building, you have 2 options. Building equals yes or no. So a lot of the tooling has advanced so much that it's hard for people to mess up that tag because it's already pre-populated. You can pick a certain building type, you can pick a certain height, you can put certain things within that feature. And the tooling has evolved enough to say, this doesn't work here. This is a line. This can't be called a building. This has to be a road or a path. So we've been able to build that into our tools to reduce errors as well. So I'm sorry, I'm just being a little bit. So that helps. Okay, one more in the back.
All right, last question.
Yeah, so thanks for your insightful talk. My question is, as we know that the image classification, the image segmentation or image detection has been fully developed. So, for example, people can extract the shapefile of a building from the remote sensing image. So I wonder, have the OSM also tried to use such approaches to extract data into the database? And if have, what about the accuracy? Yeah, that's all.
So this is just my opinion, but I think as long as I'm standing here, I would say we would approach it as a human in the loop no matter what. So there's Map with AI that exists right now, and it brings in a lot of Microsoft building footprints that were extracted with machine learning and aerial imagery. So those buildings are finding their way into OpenStreetMap, but it involves a person first accepting that building and then uploading it. I would like to see the same thing for street view and street features. We have Mapple areas, OpenStreetMap, and being able to pull some street signs and crosswalks and different things in and testing that out in the same manner. But for now, it's mainly been building footprints. But I think it's really valuable to have that person in the loop before you upload buildings because, as you know, it hasn't fully evolved. So if we can find a way, like I said, to pull in maybe the attributes from that other data set or buildings that are just missing in an area, that's better, but the tooling is still evolving.
Thanks, Maggie. Thanks, Maggie.
Thank you.
Thanks.